Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Nick and I will be your host for today. So thank you for taking the time to join our webinar, Turn Your IoT Data into Actionable Insights. First of all, I would like you to introduce to the speakers. So first one is Bart Adams. Bart is the founder and CTO at xyzt.ai. And then there is myself. I'm the head of business development and strategy. Before jumping into the agenda, I would like to point out a few points for during the webinar. So for some interactivity, we will ask you some questions during the webinar and would really appreciate if you would answer them. If you have any thoughts or questions, you can always ask them via the chat. We will try to answer as much as possible at the end of the webinar. Otherwise, we will definitely take the time to reply to your questions via email. The webinar will also be recorded and will be shared with you as soon as possible after the event. So for now, please mute yourself and enjoy the webinar. This is the agenda for today. So we will discuss 4 topics. First topic is the overload of data and where it all comes from. After that, Bart and I will guide you through the different struggles and how you can overcome them by using xyzt.ai. The third topic, Bart will explain how you can connect your data streams, analyze them instantly, and start sharing the results. And we will end this webinar with presenting to you 2 examples of our customers using our tool to share insights. So as usual in our webinars, we like to set the scene by using a quote. In this case, it's a quote of Fast Company. And they stated there will be over 29 billion IoT devices connected by 2023. Key will be, of course, to find your way through that big amount of data. And so we really believe that the ones that manage to turn the data into real intelligence will be able to create new opportunities for themselves and for their customers. So we all know that there are a lot of data streams and they all come in different formats, which creates a lot of hustle. So here is an overview to just give you an impression on all the different data sources we handled in our platform over the last 3 years. And apart from that, our customers often combine different data sources to get even better insights or to give more context, which makes it even more complicated. And actually, also apart from the amount of data sources, IoT data is also often spatial and temporal. If you think about a sensor or if you think about other data, you want to capture a value generated by a sensor, for example, somewhere on Earth at a certain point in time. And let that just be one of the big problems. So most of the tools in the market today, they are good at either location or time, but rarely at both of them. And it becomes even more complex if you think about the fact that a sensor can also move in space over time. So to just reinforce what we just explained, McKinsey stated that by 2023, 95% of all sold vehicles will be connected. So if we do some quick math, then we know that by 2030, 2 billion vehicles on our roads will be connected. And every car will generate its location at a certain time and lots of parameters. So you can imagine the data volume that would generate, and you could also imagine probably the insights you would get out of it if you manage to use them correctly. So this brings me to our first poll question. We really want to make sure that our webinar is tailored to your needs. So what is your organization's position within the IoT ecosystem? A, we build and sell IoT hardware. B, we integrate IoT hardware and software. C, we buy and use IoT data. Or D, other. Some more seconds so that everybody can reply. And here are the results. So most of the people integrate IoT hardware and software, and some of them also buy it. I will now hand over to Bart, who will explain how to turn your go-to-market challenges into the opportunities.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you all for joining. So as Nick explained, IoT gives a lot of challenges. There's data overload, there's so much data is temporal, it's changing constantly, and sometimes even the sensors are moving, and you need to deal with spatial and temporal to deal with IoT data. And this is exactly what your customers are also struggling with. They are really struggling with extracting value from the data. Over the past years, Nick and we visited so many companies, so many organizations, and we've really seen many struggles. For example, in one instance, the company mentioned that they had bought for over $100,000 of IoT data, but they didn't touch it because it was just too much data. It was too complex for them to start analyzing the data. In another instance, and this was a US company, the VP data told us that typically when they have a new question to solve, it would take them a couple months of time to really build the algorithms and start extracting the insights. And as you know, Python, that's not super straightforward because if the data is big and there's spatial components and so on. But then also what we saw when we looked at all those organizations, and especially the bigger ones, there's typically only a few data scientists in the organization, and they are being used by different departments, different business units. So they become the bottleneck. And typically what happens is that people get frustrated. They invested in the data, they invested in all this information, but they cannot exploit the data. So what we try to convey today as an IoT company, as an IoT hardware company, but also as an IoT data integrator, that you could turn your focus also from generating data to providing analytics. And as we all know, data without analytics, it's useless. It's just sitting there. It's noise on your drive, on your cloud storage. So that's one topic to solve there. Second is that when you start leveraging the data for analytics, it also allows you from a business point of view to install or implement a new monetization strategy. It allows you to go to market not just with the data, not just with the hardware, but also with an analytics offering to your customers. And then thirdly, keep in mind that the customers that you serve, they typically have a problem to solve. And the closer you are to solving that problem, the more valuable you are. And that's really what you do when offering also analytics, because that's what they need ultimately to extract those insights to solve those problems. Now, we talk to a lot of IoT tech companies, and the first thing that they would do is they would go to open source. They would look around, and being a technical guy myself, it's normal. I would typically also do that. But what we've seen is that many of those organizations, they come back from it and they get in touch with us because of three key reasons. The first one is lack of scalability. If you look at the screenshot on the right, this is actually a Chrome browser crashing. And that's with a popular open source tool that handles some space-time data, and it already crashes at 250 megabytes of data. And if you look at organizations that are dealing with lots of IoT data, this is peanuts. Typically, this is like minutes of data instead of days or weeks or months of data that they need to analyze. So that's the first issue that they encounter. The second is lack of IoT focus. And this is all related to these temporal spatial components in the data. And then third, don't forget that you will be selling this analytic solution to organizations, to enterprises as well, who have certain enterprise capability needs, like, for example, authentication, encryption, backup, SLAs, uptime, and so on. And this is something, of course, that open source by itself does not offer at all. Then the second part that people take, and it's a logical one as well. We're used to building sensor tech. Why can't we sell a SaaS solution? So people try to build a solution themselves, and it's typically a long path down a very costly and risky process. And the reason is there's so many steps involved. The first step is you have to connect to your data lake. You have to connect to your data sources. You have to install scalable storage for that. You have to have your connectors implemented. Then to do analytics, you need to build algorithms. You need to build algorithms to capture anomalies, trends, and so on. Then you need to visualize the data. You need to visualize the insights. And typically, once you start doing that, you realize, oh, maybe we should do it differently. And you start iterating. And only after a few iterations, you can start building dashboards, because typically what people want is not just one visualization, but they need a combination of different visualizations. And then once you're ready with the dashboarding, you can start deploying in the cloud. You choose a cloud provider, you do the deployment, you make sure the infrastructure is there. You have to take care with all the complexities of the cloud deployment. And only then, and this is really months or even years of time, you can start providing value to your customers. They can start analyzing and sharing insights. And this is exactly what XYZT.ai solves or wants to solve for you. We want to bring down this gap between starting to think about analytics and offering it to your customers from years or months to days. And that's really what with XYZT integration you can do. And typically it takes only a couple of days to get connected and get offering analytics to your customers. And that's what we're going to show later in this webinar, also with a couple case studies. So to make this very concrete, I did a small back of the envelope calculation on buy versus build. It's a typical discussion I have as a CTO with our prospects, and it's typically also what they do before getting into a meeting or after the first meeting. So let me take you through this calculation line by line. So on the first line, if you buy or license our solution, it's of course a zero cost to develop something because it's already there. If you start developing yourself, and of course I've seen this myself because we do build solutions, it takes quite a bit of effort and investment to get to the MVP phase. The MVP is the minimum viable product. It's really the product that you need to be able to start talking to your customers, to start showing what analytics you can offer. And this would take you at least 6 months of time with 2 developers. So that's where this 120K comes from. But typically it would take you at least maybe a year with 2 developers. So that's this first line. Second line is the integration costs, which you don't have if you build yourself. If you integrate with XYZT.ai, what we've seen with our customers is that it typically takes them a couple of weeks, at most a month of time to glue together the APIs and start integrating the data flow into our pipeline. So that's about 1 month cost. Then there's the licensing cost, which of course varies on the amount of data, but it can start as low as 35K a year. But with that price, you get everything. You don't only get the software, you get the deployment, you get the maintenance, you get the backup, you get the SLA guarantees, and so on. And that's something that you don't get when you develop yourself. You have to maintain your product, and that's something that people typically overlook. So you have to keep those developers there because they will have to be busy bug fixing and improving the software. And you have to host and of course, pay for that as well. So if you add up all those lines, you will see that there's like a factor of at least 5 in cost. And it's not just a cost issue, it's also a risk issue. If you start developing yourself, if you're handling lots of data, it's unsure whether you will be able to, or your developers will be able to cover that, that complexity. And this is exactly what we are in business for, to help you avoid that risk, avoid that cost, and get to market faster, quicker, and more easy. So who do we cater to? Well, we cater to typically 3 different groups of organizations. The first one is the hardware IoT companies. And I think there's a couple of you in the audience that are in this category. So these are organizations that typically build sensor hardware, they either sell the hardware or they install the hardware and sell the data. Companies that you might know, like Bridgestone, they're in the mobility space. Intelsat, they're in the connectivity space with satellites. OceanSync also, Spire and CrowdScan, and so on. So there's many of those companies that are very experts in what they do. Second type of companies are what we call data integrators. Those are organizations that leverage IoT data, but typically not just one data source. They get the data from multiple data providers, and sometimes the data is also from a different variety. The most well-known company, I think, is Project 44, who uses a lot of different IoT data sources to provide analytical capabilities to their customers. But there's many more of those as well. And then the third group of companies or organizations are system integrators. Those organizations, they deal with a whole different level of complexity. They don't just have to deal with the sensor hardware, they also have to deal with the entire solution, the entire system, or even sometimes system of systems. And XYZT typically plays the role of a component in these systems with system integrators. So examples are Securitas, Thales, you know them very well, of course. So having talked about the challenges, having talked about build or buy, and having talked about who we address, who we cater for, I think, Nick, it's time maybe to show something about the platform.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, Bart. So in this slide, we want to show you two examples of data that we typically see in our tool. To actually divide them into two big groups. Example one is an example connected vehicle IoT data, which is movement data. So the location changes over time. And the second example is what we call time series data. And you can think of it as being data captured by a static sensor. So now, before handing back over to Bart, I would like to summarize why the XYZT platform can be your solution. The reason why is mainly because we focused on 4 major topics. So the first one is our tool really has no problem with combining location and time, which we already stated before in the webinar. There are a lot of tools in the market, but often they are good at one of them. Second, bring your own data. So we allow you to easily connect your own data coming from different sources via our API to the XYZT platform. Third one is our platform is really built for the future and made to scale as your data grows. And number 4, by using the XYZT tool, your time to market will reduce, and this will result in new revenue streams even faster. So that also brings me to the next poll question of today. Are you already offering analytic solutions to your customers? The answers are A, yes, we already do. B, no, but we are definitely considering. And C, no, and we don't have plans to do so in the near future. Yes, so the results. So most of you either already do or are not yet doing, but definitely considering. And this brings us to the third topic on the agenda, connect, analyze, and share. Over to you, Bart.
Okay, thank you also. Good to see that there's quite some interest in analytics in the audience. So let me talk about how does this work? How do you integrate with XYZT.ai? And typically what we like to show or explain is that it involves 3 steps. First, you have to connect your data streams, your data sources, to allow you to analyze the data and set up maybe dashboards and analysis for your customers, and then to allow them to share their insights with their customers or their audience. So it brings me back to this very simple slide: connect, analyze, and share. And what I want to do now, and bear with me if you're not technical, but I'm going to try to explain this with an architecture diagram, a very high-level architecture diagram that will also help me later on to explain the different case studies from our customers. So starting really at the beginning, you of course have your sensors, your sensor technology, but in the end they are generating data, and you are logging this data, you are storing this data somewhere on a database, on a disk, on a cloud storage, on a data lake or a data store. It really doesn't matter. So the first step to do is to decide what you want to do. Do you want to provide real-time insights, or do you want to provide maybe more historic insights? So the first step really to do is to implement some sort of a streaming process, a cron job, a batch job that interacts with our APIs. So the XYZT.ai platform comes with a full REST API that is Open API compliant. That means that you can just download the API as a JSON file, and you can use it in any of your tooling or any of the generate tools that exist to create an API connector in your favorite language. That's really a matter of just a few minutes of setup. And from that point on, you can interact with the platform in any way. You can create projects, you can create data sets, you can upload data, you can upload multiple data sets, you can stream data to the platform, you can even compile a complete dashboard using your generation code by calling API points that create the dashboard, create the widgets, configure the widgets, and so on. So there's a whole documented API for that. From that point on, your data is streaming into the XYZT.ai cloud deployment, and we will take care of that spatial temporal data. We will build those indices that you need to do interactive analytics on the data. And we will provide the microservices that are needed to visualize, to analyze the data. So this first step is really the connect step. This is where there's some part of the integration being done. Second step is basically to provide access to the analytical interfaces, the visual interfaces to your customers. And this can be done in two main ways. The first way is that you allow your customers to directly connect to the XYZT.ai frontend. There's a highly responsive, interactive, beautiful frontend to interact with your data. It can do hotspot analysis, trend analysis, all the things that you would need in an IoT analytical context. So this we call direct analytics. Second way to provide analytics to your customers is by embedding the XYZT.ai platform entirely or partly into your own application. And that is what is shown here at the bottom. And in that case, your customers, they would interact with your application, but they would benefit from the capabilities of the XYZT.ai platform. So this is a second way of providing embedded analytics to your customers. And then finally, the final step is really for your customers to share what they see. And this is really what we provide out of the box into the XYZT.ai platform. So for the direct users, they can share any insight, any visualization, any dashboard with their customers, their colleagues, or any stakeholder that they want to show the insights to. So this is what we call connect, analyze, and share from a very high level architecture point of view. And that brings me actually to the use cases. So for today, I've selected two case studies of our customers to show you how they integrate, to make it a little bit more concrete on what type of integration and what type of solution they offer with our platform. And the first one is from a customer here in Belgium. They're called CrowdScan, and they are specialists in crowd monitoring and in people flow capturing. So basically, the problem here is that they built sensor technology, and it's really cool sensor technology, I'll talk about it in a minute, that allows cities basically to sense every location in the city or event organizers to monitor crowds at big festivals, for example. Now, between this gathering of the data and the end user, which will be an analyst working for a city, there is a huge gap. There is a huge gap from bringing the data to insights. And that's exactly what they cover with the XYZT.ai platform. So how does it look like? So I'm going to go back to the architecture diagram and try to explain you with different blocks how the integration is done. So the first part is what was already there. And this is what in a very simplistic visualization, what was already there. So this is all what CrowdScan is doing internally. So here on the left, in this little picture, you see a screenshot of one of their sensors. And you have to imagine that to capture the people flow or the people density in an area, you need multiple of those sensors. And that's what you see here on this picture that I took from their website. So basically, you have those sensors here, and they start communicating just with radio technology. And then if someone moves in between, there will be this shadowing, or there will be this reduction in signal strength between those sensors. And this is how they measure people flow in a very privacy aware technology, because there's no real people tracking going on. It's really just sensing how much loss there is in the signals. This information is gathered by a gateway. You see one here in the streets, I think in Antwerp in Belgium. And that information is then streamed continuously to their cloud. So they have their clouds set up to gather all the sensor IoT data. Now, how to bring this data to the end user? You can, of course, drop a dump of the data in an S3 bucket, for example, but that's not what the city can handle. That's not what the event organizers can handle. So basically what they do is they use our API, and with the API, you can automate everything. So imagine that they onboard a new city or a new event organizer, and there's a new event going on. So they can automate with the API the creation of a project, creation of a data set, the creation of a dashboard, and then uploading of the data, streaming the data. So they could just call the upload every 10 seconds, every 5 seconds, every minute, whatever they prefer. And we will aggregate the data. We will make sure that the data becomes actionable, and that the dashboards, for example, update when there's new data coming in. So that's the connect step that we talked about before. And then what's the next step? Well, the next step is to provide analytics to their customers, and not just one customer, but this is really where the multiplication of the investment comes. They can provide this analytics to every customer that they have. Whether it's a city, a second city, and so on, whether it's a building manager working for a property investment company, or whether it's an event manager, it doesn't matter to us. That's transparent. They can just decide to share or set up certain projects for their different customers. So what does it look like? I just took one example that was used for an indoor situation. In this case, you have to imagine this is a building with different floor levels, with different rooms. And basically, the people in the building wanted to monitor the usage of the different rooms and how efficient is the different space allocated for different events and so on. So here you see just one example of a dashboard that can be built with our tool using this data integration. So first you see a map here. The different zones, they're color-coded based on, first of all, whether there's data. And then in this case, the color coding is based on the number of people in the zone in the last hour. So they set it up to always look at the last hour. And when new data comes in, those colors can update. So if they become red, it will be more than 30 people in that zone. So that's what you see here. Here you also see some temporal charts, some trends focusing on the last hour, the last 24 hours. The really nice thing is that they can provide this dashboard to their customer as a real-time view, but the customer can also dive into the history of the data and do analytics, like you see here at the bottom. When is it most busy? Is it during the morning hours, the noon hours, and so on? So that's what you see here. Second case study I wanted to talk about today is basically one that's not just from one of our customers, but it's a case study from many of our customers. And it involves connected vehicle data. As Nick explained, connected vehicle data is really, really big data. You have to imagine not just one sensor, but millions of sensors sending out data continuously. So it's a huge data stream. A typical use case is to provide, for example, city mobility analysts or road authorities with analytics on top of this data. So what's the setup? Basically, it starts with the connected vehicles, and that's what you see here. So the connected vehicles, they're constantly connected to the internet. They have a SIM card. They send a continuous stream of IoT data. It can be their location, their velocity, but it can also the value of a sensor in the wheels. It can be an acceleration value. It can be so many different sensor values. So they collect this data in a data cloud, make sure that they store the data and have it available for their customers. Now, a typical use case that we see with this type of data with our platform is that you would provide a daily cron job update. So basically what you do is you implement a daily cron job every night, for example, at 1 a.m. You extract the data of the past day and you push it to the XYZT platform. And that allows their customers to get a view on the data with a daily update. And for example, a city mobility analyst can then have data sets that are, for example, every week of the year. And then the last week will always be updated on the fly and on the go. And they can look at the data and do their analytics. But it can also be an analyst working for an investment company that is investing in EV infrastructure. Or it can be an analyst working for a road construction company that wants to analyze the quality of the roads that they're building. So you can see, again, one source of data, many different end users, many different analytics capabilities, and many different monetization opportunities. What does it look like in the end, the integration? Well, it can look in many different ways. One way could be that this company would provide a view like this, a view that allows people to zoom in and out on the data on the map, to look at trends on the timeline, to filter on the data, to see statistics on the data. So this is a typical view that our users would then provide to a mobility analyst, for example, someone who really still wants to dive in and dive deep into the data. But it can also look like this. It can look like just the top 10 or a top 20 of the most actively driven roads, the most congested roads, the roads where people are speeding. This information all comes from this floating vehicle data, and they can use the XYZT platform to provide, for example, an analyst in a city or at a police department with this information. And typically, this type of users, they just want to see and look at the dashboard. They normally don't want to dive deep into the data. So these were two use cases, but the cases are endless. We are being used with maritime companies, with satellite companies, with aviation companies, with people flow companies. And in all those cases, it always involves IoT data that has a spatial and temporal component. And that brings me, I think, Nick, to the end of the webinar, and I'll give it to you for the key takeaways.
Thanks, Bart, for showing us the examples. So we wrote down 3 key takeaways for you. The first one is that actually we know that the value is in the insights and it's not in the data itself. So we really want to make sure that you avoid churn from your customers by being closer to their needs. The second one is that our platform will definitely enable you to market faster with a smaller budget and less risk. And the third one is that you should focus on your business, on what you are good at, and you can rely on the XYZT.ai platform for the analytics. So before wrapping up this webinar and going to the Q&A, we do have a last poll question for you, and it's probably the most important one for us. So do you want to learn more about XYZT.ai? A, yes, please reach out to me. B, not for now, but keep me updated, or C, no thanks? And now, to end the webinar, we will do some Q&A still. So we have received some questions through the chat. So first question comes from Matt, and he's asking about how he can leverage the XYZ features for a computerized maintenance management system. He's talking about features such as filters, statistics, heat maps, clusters, trajectories, to gain, in the end, insights from his data. There is also a second part to the question. How secure and reliable is XYZ for handling sensitive or confidential data? So Bart, I think that is a good one for you to answer.
Yes, a very good question or questions. So to answer the first part, we do offer all those capabilities. So indeed, there are capabilities to show hotspots, to analyze hotspots, to look at the trends, to see the trajectories. So that's all included. So it's typically what we showed today was like a tip of the iceberg. There's so many capabilities to start analyzing the data. To answer the second question, how secure and reliable is it? So that's, of course, because we are in the business of IoT data, and IoT data almost always is very sensitive data, and we understand that for our customers. So also the APIs, they're always with authentication. For example, the API uses JWT tokens that expire after a couple minutes again, and then you need to re-authenticate and so on. So all those things are managed also in the front end. There's authentication, data is encrypted, data is backed up, and so on in our storage. How reliable is it? And that's really what we spend a lot of effort on. So the deployment in the SaaS environment is a cloud deployment. It's a microservices deployment. It's elastically scalable, so it's redundant. It scales up and down on demand. And we also guarantee in the SLA a 99.9 uptime. So, and we've never had issues with that. And that's really how we engineered the cloud platform. Related to that also is the fact that we factored in scalability. We have customers using our platform not with millions of data points, not with tens of millions, not with hundreds of millions, but really with billions of data points, while still having interactivity on their queries and on their visualization. And that also makes that it can be very reliable, and it would not just crash on sometimes a bigger data set. So I hope that answers your question. But if you want to know more, maybe we can discuss in a separate meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Then there is still a second question. Can we use the XYZ platform really with any type of IoT data? So Bart, I think you can elaborate on that as well.
Yeah, very good question. So any type of IoT data, I would say yes and no. The yes part is the platform can ingest any type of data. It's not tied to a specific format or a specific type of data, as long as the data has a location component, a temporal component, and then maybe attributes. And the location component, as we explained, can be moving when it's a moving sensor, or it can be a fixed location. It can be like a point somewhere on Earth. It can be a line segment if you're measuring maybe throughput through a street, or it can be an area like with the crowd scan case when you're measuring people density in an area. So that being said, it's very open and flexible, and the API allows you basically to tell the platform what is in your data, and the platform adapts to what is in your data. There are, of course, data sources that sometimes are of a different format or a different type, and the typical example would be video, for example. A video feed is not something that necessarily has a location. Maybe there might be a location associated to the video feed, and then you could extract features from the video and then ingest that into the platform. But so typically it's if you have location data with temporal time series data, it can be ingested in the platform. And all the, for your reference, if you get the recording of the webinar, all those data sources listed on that slide about the data overload, they have been used with our platform.
Okay, thank you very much for answering the questions, Bart. So to wrap up this webinar, I would like to say thank you to everybody who joined us today. If you still think of questions after this webinar, then definitely don't hesitate to reach out to Bart or myself. We will also send out an email shortly after this webinar with all the links to the recordings to which you can reply as well. And then I want to thank Bart for this very interesting webinar, and to everybody of you, have a nice rest of your day. Bye.
Bye-bye.